Before we start, I want to say thank you. A lot of you reached out after my last video to check on our Annie pup, and I really appreciate that. If you weren't here last week, Annie is our 4-year-old retriever. She became ill quite suddenly, catching us completely off guard. She's stable now and doing well. Thankfully, she and us are in a much better place. So this week felt like one of those moments when the pressure lifts a little. Not completely, but enough to move forward again. And when that happens, I try to make the most of it. That's what happened last Tuesday. So I went out to do what I do, make photographs. This video is about this week's images, but it's also about something broader than that. It's about recognizing those brief openings when life loosens its grip, even slightly, and choosing to create something while the moment is available. Not because it fixes anything specific, not because it needs to mean more than it does, just because the door to create something opens. When I went out, the landscape felt firmly resolved. Snow simplifies compositions, it removes distraction. What's left tends to be structure, line, and light. In these first photographs, what held my attention wasn't restraint. In fact, the images felt bold and unexpected. A grain silo standing alone, fence lines cutting cleanly through snow, a high winter sun piercing a dark blue sky and catching the surface of a field with intense light. I was looking for clarity, to clear my head of all last week's emotions. It was impossible to miss. I think creativity often starts there for me, not with inspiration, but with the decision to move enough to notice what's already present, to recognize the parts of the whole. As I traveled, I found myself thinking about photographs and also about movement and time, about how days unfold whether we want them to or not. I don't think creativity always starts where we expect it to. We tend to think it begins with inspiration or motivation or the right conditions lining up. In my experience, it usually starts with a decision to go outside, slow down, and engage instead of postponing. This week, that decision took the form of creating with my camera, but that was the result, not the impetus. As I was out photographing, I kept thinking about how often creativity actually begins somewhere else entirely, not with my photography, but with creating something small and ordinary, writing in a journal, cooking a family meal, or just making a sandwich that's worth sitting down for instead of eating on the way out the door. It could even be choosing what to wear in the morning instead of reaching for whatever's draped over a chair. My point is, creativity doesn't require grand gestures. My examples are small acts of attention and being intentional in the moment, but in reality, they're also acts of creation. And once you make one deliberate choice, another tends to follow. Momentum can start quietly and then begin to lead our way. For me, that momentum often ends up with a camera in my hand. What I want to show you now are a few images from this week. They're not statements. They're not meant to prove anything. They're simply the result of going out while I could, with the intention of following my creative spark. As I moved through the day, I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I wasn't trying to resolve a theme or complete an idea. I was just paying attention to what anchored my eye. Light moving across a surface or space opening where I didn't expect it. A cemetery held in long winter shadows, a road carving like a knife through open farmland, stacked logs at a sawmill, tracks in the snow, already pointing somewhere. And at one point, that openness led to somewhere unexpected. I was invited to observe a group of Amish men rebuilding a structure together, in the way barn raisings have been done for generations. I didn't arrive with any expectation beyond making photographs. What I found was a group of people who worked so well together, communicated clearly in happy and jovial tones, and received genuine satisfaction in the act of creating something side by side, It was infectious. I was welcomed warmly on a very cold day of -5 degrees Fahrenheit. But more importantly, I was allowed to photograph how work happens when trust and bond unite in the common goal of creativity. From that point on, my photographs changed. My focus moved from landscape to coordination, from open space to shared effort, hands passing timbers, men working at different heights, each part depending on the others. What struck me most was how little needed to be said. A man adding tools to his belt, another measuring and marking wood, a strap secured to lift heavy beams, timbers moving upward, one after another, with many hands involved along the way. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt performative. Work, a lot of work, was simply happening. I think we sometimes underestimate how important that kind of ease is. Not comfort. Ease. Ease is what lets us stay with something without wrestling it into meaning or forcing importance onto it. A few of these images came together quickly. Others took a little patience. None of them felt forced or heavy, and that mattered a great deal to me. There's a tendency to believe that serious work must always feel serious while it's being done. I don't think that's true. I couldn't disagree more. Some of the most honest work happens when we're simply present and unburdened enough to notice. That's what this week offered, and I accepted it with openness to act and intention to create. As my images continued to come together, I kept thinking about how transferable this is. Photography is a big part of my language, but the impulse, the intention, applies anywhere. If our photography feels stuck, sometimes the answer isn't to push harder at photography. Sometimes it's to make something else first. Even something simple like a really good sandwich, not as a workaround, not as a trick, just as a way to begin moving forward creatively again. Once creative movement starts, direction often takes care of itself. That's what I'm celebrating in this video. Not necessarily the images themselves, although I'm happy I made them. What I'm celebrating is the ability to act while the moment allows it. These windows don't always announce themselves. Maybe they don't last as long as we'd like, and they don't need to be turned into something larger than they are. They just need to be used. If you're watching this and you have one of those moments where the pressure lifts, even briefly, I hope you take advantage of it too. Make something. Anything. Let the act of choosing carry you forward to change your momentum. And if that momentum leads you back to photography, all the better. And no regrets. I'm glad I went out this week. I'm thrilled to make new friends, and I'm glad I made these black and white images. I'm happy to be able to share them with you. Thanks for being here. It means the world to me. See you next week.